Welcome back. Joining us now is Oklahoma Labor Commissioner Mark Costello. Commissioner Costello, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you, Michael.
Since you were elected in 2010 and started serving in the role of Labor Commissioner, the legislature has cut taxes a few more times, but then the courts have come in and thwarted that. Are you hearing anything from workers? What effect is that having on small businesses?
Well, it's never a good idea to penalize productivity, to penalize earnings, and that's effectively the progress towards reduction of the state income tax, returning money back to the taxpayers themselves, has been thwarted by the courts, but mostly by a lack of initiative and leadership at the Capitol.
Well, let's talk about initiative and leadership. Since taking over the Labor Department, you have actually streamlined some operations. How have you accomplished that, and what effect has that had on government?
Well, one of the effects is we've demonstrated that you can actually shutter an office, as we did in Tulsa. You can consolidate, you can lower your head count by up to 30%, and at the same time increase productivity. So it can be done in government, but Michael, it does take political will. We've demonstrated it with one small agency, but it gives me hope that there is much, much more improvement that can be made so that we can be more efficient for what people want.
So going into streamlining efforts, what is the grander vision there, and what example do you think that can set for how state government can operate?
As Representative Newell said in the previous segment, government is not the private sector. So what we have to do in government is to take the best practices, whether it's reform of workers' comp out of Arkansas, or what I've been advocating, which is reform of merit protection, so that we can have greater productivity and pay when people perform well in the public sector. It can be done, Michael, but we have yet to achieve it.
You have also been, shifting gears a little bit if we can, you've also been very critical of the Affordable Care Act and its impact on jobs and on employees and everything else. Where does that stand right now with the Attorney General, the lawsuit and everything? What are you hearing from business owners across the state with respect to that issue?
I think that there is a reason why more companies in America today are going out of business than into business. One of those is the uncertainties caused by government mandates, specifically Obamacare, if you will. The idea that the federal government will micromanage each individual business's medical contract is really kind of silly. I mean, for over a generation, 2 generations in this country, we had a social contract, whereas if you wanted to hire quality people, you provided medical care. Now it's just become another entitlement out of Washington, which will interfere with productivity, businesses, entrepreneurs, and workers alike.
Let's talk about another issue that's being driven from Washington, but we're seeing at the state level, in fact, here in Oklahoma, and that's the minimum wage discussion. And there's some here, especially going into this session, suggesting that Oklahoma needs to raise the minimum wage. Let me start right there with your thoughts on this conversation in Oklahoma.
Well, as I mentioned, more companies are going out of business. According to the Congressional Budget Office, if Obama's scheme of $10 plus an hour goes into effect, 500,000 more Americans will be without jobs. Companies will never come into existence in the first place. We forget that the big companies were once small companies. Devon was 4.5 employees when they started. So how many more Devons are never going to come into business? How many young workers will be denied the opportunity of that first rung of success by having government come in and mandate fairness? I think that the marketplace works well. I don't think we should deny young people that first opportunity to success. I've talked to hundreds of self-made people in this state. Every single one of them I've spoken to once worked for minimum wage.
You talk about self-made, and we should point out that before you came into office, you yourself an entrepreneur and a businessman. So talk to me about, not only from your role today as Labor Commissioner, but from your previous experience as well in the private sector, this discussion of raising the minimum wage or reducing the tax burden, which has a larger impact on the worker and their family?
Well, most people I know would cross rush hour traffic to save 3 or 4 cents a gallon on gasoline. To think that taxes don't matter to a businessman means that you would have to come from the perspective of a lawyer and a lifelong politician like Hillary Clinton that says that businesses and entrepreneurs don't create jobs. Really? They do, and taxes matter. And even a difference of 5% versus 0%, 0 is a much better number.
You know, we've got the election coming up in just a few days, and we've even noticed in ads in this state, the income tax has become an issue, even in the gubernatorial race. This theme that we have today, how much is the income tax conversation a political important piece of this election cycle?
Well, I don't fully know, but I do know this, that the politics of envy, which is the purview of the left, this idea that you can, by making successful people less wealthy, somehow better off the poor, is absurd. It hasn't worked in any socialist experiment in history. It's not going to work in Oklahoma. And now that we're sandwiched between two 0% states, let's keep our eye on the ball. Let's make Oklahoma the great state that it is and not worry about class envy.
And of course, 0%, meaning Kansas, if you're a small business or an entrepreneur, you go to Kansas or you go to Texas and you're not paying that tax at all. You can reinvest it yourself or in your employees.
And once again, that's a difference. If you add 5% on top of 39%, that's about 12% differential. Mm-hmm. A lot more than 3 cents a gallon on gasoline in terms of a percentage. Yes, incentives matter. People work for themselves, their families, their own ideal of American exceptionalism. They don't work for the government. You really did build it if you started a business.
Commissioner Costello, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Michael.
Appreciate it. Folks, we'll be right back.